But one thing I do want to point out on the tax loss harvesting that not everybody knows.
And I'm sure you have a vision around your financial future. And that's what we're going to dig into today. We're going to dig into your financial future.
So we'll talk about traditional IRAs versus Roth IRAs, what a backdoor Roth is and how to do it, 529 plans, that is for your kids, but also for you. I'm Steph Guild. I think I've met many of you. We are here to talk about building a legacy. One thing I do want to share about my background really quick is that before I came to Robinhood, I was at JP Morgan. And the last 11 years that I was at JP Morgan, of the 21, I was in the private bank. And during that time, I saw exactly how wealthy people plan to make sure that the money that they've made themselves or inherited lasts generations. And that's really part of the reason why we wanted to do this session.
Yeah, and I'm Ken Johnson. So Steph and I work together here at Robinhood. And before I joined Robinhood, I was actually at Wells Fargo for over a decade, doing equity strategy, equity research, but I also spent time as a wealth planner. And it's crazy as I look at this headshot. I'm like, I don't even recognize myself because my hair is completely different now.
So you worked at a bank, so you had to look
right.
like that.
That's exactly right. But I'm super excited to be here with you all today and share some tips and tricks around financial planning and financial building.
Before we get started, content is provided for informational purposes only. None of this constitutes tax or investment or estate planning advice, and consult your attorney if you want to do any of those things for real. All right, so we're going to let music be our guide. Ken and I love music. I mean, every time I'm like around him, he's like bopping to something. So we're going to use that as our guide here. And our set list today is going to be savings, taxes, and planning.
And I would say that each and every one of you here today is a visionary, right? You have a vision around your family. You have a vision around your career. And I'm sure you have a vision around your financial future. And that's what we're going to dig into today. We're going to dig into your financial future. And I would also say that many of you as traders also think of yourselves or really operate in the CIO headspace, right? Chief Investment Officer. I want you today to really start to think like a CFO. And so for us, when you're thinking like a CFO, it really means that you're thinking holistically around your financial well-being, right? So you're not just concerned about the investments. You're thinking strategically about how can I get to where I want to go from where I am today.
Okay, Save Tonight. In the words of Eagle Eye Cherry, if you remember that song. Who remembers that song? Yeah. It reminds me of my time in college, maybe a time I was perhaps dancing on a couch. But in those days, I kind of wish someone would have pulled me aside and said, listen, if you do anything in your life, save tonight, save tomorrow, save, consistently. And the reason why, right now I think savings has never been more important is a few reasons. One, even if inflation continues to come down, it doesn't go to zero or negative. Prices don't tend to drop. They tend to go up over time. You can see this chart of CPI from 1994 to 2024. And what that means is, like, for example, in 2000, if you had $1,000 and did nothing with it, it would feel like it's worth a little over $500 in this year. Another reason why I think saving and kind of planning is so important is Social Security is expected by the Social Security Administration to start depleting in 2034. 10 years can go by very, very quickly. And the other reason why, I kind of just want to make sure that we're all doing this for ourselves is because projected debt to GDP by the Congressional Budget Office is also expected to be 120% by 2034 as well. And so, does anyone remember the movie Jaws? Okay, so there's a scene in Jaws. The guy in the little tugboat goes out to the front of his boat, sees the shark for the first time, comes back in and says, we're going to need a bigger boat. And we are all going to need a bigger boat because we cannot rely on the things our grandparents got to rely on, Social Security and things like that. So that's, again, why we're here today.
Yeah, and you have to start off by building your foundation. And so, we talked about the fact that we both love music. So have any of you ever created a mixtape or created your own CD before?
Yes, we're that old.
It's in the back. Okay, cool. So you know how when you create your own mixtape, you have all these types of songs. You have your slow jams to get you in the mood, whatever you need to be in the mood for. You have your upbeat songs to get you pumped and ready, maybe some inspirational songs if you like that.
Now you have your playlist.
There you go. There you go. But you have this structure that you develop that becomes kind of the structure of how you may see yourself and the things that you feel you need to move forward. You kind of can use that analogy when it comes to the way you should structure your savings, right? So, of course, you got to have your 3 to 12 months of a rainy day fund in case, God forbid, something happens to you or your family. Then you have another bucket, which is going to be around your long-term oriented goals. So any of your retirement goals or any other goals that you want to have a bucket for that. And then you have your aspirational portfolio. In your aspirational portfolio, a lot of you are traders. Think of it kind of as that riskier piece, right? Remember when you may take that risky trade where the margin of error is kind of big, so it's kind of wide, and so but you still want to do it, right? So you have a bucket for that as well. What I would tell you though is that none of that is set in stone. You can always mix and mingle that works best for you. And remember, we're thinking like a CFO. So CFOs think about the money that's coming in and the money that's going out. And you should think about that in terms of your own financial well-being. So think about all the cash flow that you have coming in and what you need and want to do with that. Also prioritize your expenses and prioritize yourself, saving for yourself. And one way to do this is to automate recurring deposits, right? So you can set up deposits to come into your account to make sure that you're hitting your savings goals.
And one thing about saving for you versus others, the takeaway for me on that is I try to save for myself before I'm putting any money aside for even my own children. Because for me, at least, like, I don't know how many people here are kind of also helping other family members sometimes, but I think if I could break a generational cycle and not ask my kids for money when I'm older, that would be amazing.
I would love it, my parents. Um, so, Steph, I have to ask you a question. So, what is one of the questions you used to get all the time at your time as working in the private bank?
Besides, like, should I sell everything and go to cash because the markets are high? It was, what's my number? How much do I need to get to? When I know I'm good, I'm done.
Yeah, and I get that question a lot too, and it's not a necessarily easy question to answer, but we'll give you two ways to think about it that I think could work well for you. So one, let's paint this picture, paint this scenario. This is your last year of work. You made $100,000 this year. One way to think about how much you need to save is plan to spend about 75 to 85% of that $100,000 within retirement, right? So that's one way to do it. Plan for that. The other way is that if you have built a nice investment pot and you want to leave some of this investment pot to your family or to charity, don't spend more than 3% of that investment pot, right? So if you have $1 million, don't spend more than $30,000. Those are two ways to think about how much you should save for yourself.
And why I say why we put 3% here too is if you think like over time, if you have this nest egg, 3%, you can round that up to 6 after taxes and things like that, and still kind of maintain the principle of the assets that you have at the time that you decide not to have income anymore. But there's definitely, I always say if people were still writing checks, if you want to bounce your last check, then you can certainly spend more than 3%. Okay, in the words of Dave Matthews Band, make the best of what's around. A CFO will think about all the kind of, tax benefits that the government might provide. So we'll talk about traditional IRAs versus Roth IRAs, what a backdoor Roth is and how to do it, 529 plans. That is for your kids, but also for you if you end up having to, pay for their education, charitable contributions and how you can use them to your benefit, especially if you have a big year from an income perspective, and then tax loss harvesting. Okay, traditional or Roth. How many people have an IRA here? Great. Was it hard to figure out whether you should have a traditional or Roth? No, All right, so maybe you should come up here and do the presentation. I'll just go through it quickly then. So a traditional IRA, the way I think about this is, one, if you make under a certain amount of money, you can contribute to that, traditional IRA and may get a tax deduction in that year. However, in the future, the gains are taxed. And so that's one thing to think about. You take it out after 59 and a half and the gains are taxed. I like to think about using a traditional IRA if you're under that income limit, which I think is like $143,000 a year if you're married filing jointly, or if you don't currently contribute to a 401k or your employer doesn't contribute to any sort of retirement plan for you, then you can put money into a traditional IRA, get a full tax deduction for that contribution, no matter how much money you make. A Roth IRA. This one, there's no tax deductibility or anything. You put the money in. There are income limitations, but when you take the money out down the road after it's been in there for 5 years, and you're over 59 and a half, you don't have any taxes, which is, to me, extremely helpful. You don't know what the tax rates are going to be. And with our debt to GDP ratio on the rise, there's a good probability taxes will be higher. So I always say consider this if you're within the income limits, which I believe is somewhere around $240,000 if you're married filing jointly, for example. In the words of Bruno Mars, leave the door open, however, for a backdoor Roth. Okay, so a backdoor Roth is when you take a traditional IRA and you also open a Roth IRA, you put cash into a traditional IRA because you can, but you don't get the tax deduction, and then you immediately transfer it to a Roth. There is, I think, a form you have to fill out. Certainly consult the IRS website for those rules. But one caveat to this is a rule called the pro rata rule. So if you ever had a 401k that you, for example, rolled over into a traditional IRA, or you put money into a traditional IRA and got a tax deduction, that means you have some money that is untaxed in a traditional IRA. And if you do this backdoor Roth, you may get taxed a bit in this. So it works best if you don't have any untaxed money in a traditional IRA currently. Taxman
from the Beatles. So let's talk about a couple other strategies related to tax efficiency. The first is 529 plan. How many of you have children, grandchildren, or someone that you want to pay for their college? Awesome. So one way to do it, of course, is with the 529 plan. It works very similar to the Roth IRA that Steph just mentioned earlier, where you take after-tax money and you contribute, and then it grows tax-free, and your child or grandchild can use that for their college education. And depending on what state that you're in, you actually can get a deduction as well. So depending on where that is, just check out for that. There's also some other cool things that recently passed. One of them is that you can convert these into an IRA, assuming that your child doesn't use them for whatever the college education that they plan to use it for. That they can then use this as an IRA as well. So that's one really cool benefit. And then Steph, I know your kids are in private school. You can use this for private school.
That's where all my money goes. But yes, there you can use a little bit. I think up to $10,000 for pre-college. And 529 plans too. They can be for any future generations, so you can change the beneficiary whenever necessary for a niece, nephew, whoever you kind of want to support in the future. I know for my two nephews, I don't even give them gifts anymore because they have so much stuff already that I just put a little money in their 529 plans now.
Yeah.
They'll thank me later.
That's right. The other tool to use is the charitable contributions, right? And so, as Steph mentioned, those years when you've done really, really well in the market, you have made a ton of money, and you want to take a deduction, charitable contributions is one way to do it. The device that I really like is a donor advised fund. So with a donor advised fund, you're able to donate stock or contribute to this fund, get a deduction today, and you can decide later on how you want to spend that money within charities, right? So you don't have to know exactly where you want to donate for charity today, but at least you can get that deduction today. Another really cool feature of this is, say that year that you've done really well, and you have a lot of low-cost basis stock that you held over 12 months of long-term appreciation, you can donate that stock into this donor advised fund, get that full deduction, and then if you decide, you can actually buy that stock back for a higher cost basis. So it's another strategy to use when you're thinking about how to get a deduction, but also at the same time, how to continue to have a diversified portfolio and fulfill your overall financial goals.
This is something that my old clients used to do all the time. Around November, December, we take a look, take something that has been held for more than 12 months, has a decent gain in it, and then make sure we get the deduction on the full amount. That means you don't pay for the gains in it, and then you get to buy it back, like
That's right.
Ken said. So this is a good one.
And finally, tax loss harvesting, which I hope that you all are doing as traders. And so essentially with tax loss harvesting, you're taking your short-term gains and losses, netting those, your long-term gain and losses, netting those, and then netting the nets. And with that, you can, if you have a loss, you can deduct up to $3,000 that first year, and then you can have a carry forward that you can use in subsequent years. So just remember that we're thinking like a CFO. So losses are not really losses for us. They're just tools that we can use to continue to be tax efficient and make sure that we have a very diversified, very broad portfolio that really helps us to achieve the financial goals that we have laid out for ourselves.
be cautious of the 30-day rule. There is like the wash sale rule, right? So if you go to sell something for a loss, if you bought it at any point 30 days before, or you transact in it 30 days after, you can't take the loss in that moment. It becomes a wash sale. So just be careful, like not to touch things for 30 days or so after you sell something for a loss. Okay, in the words of Aloe Beck, I'm the man with the plan. So estate planning is something that we think is really important. So there's a couple of things that we think you should need to have. I know this is optional, but if you do have a spouse, joint account is really helpful because if something were to happen to you or to them, you have access to the funds right away. You don't have to go through the whole probate process. A will is also extremely important. It just outlines where you want everything to go. And it helps a lot because like I was telling you the other day, my dad's good friend passed away. No will, no heirs, and had $120,000 sitting in a bank account. And now the state gets to decide where that money goes, and it will take probably a couple of years. Definitely have something outlined. Power of attorney, that's to help. Somebody will make decisions on your behalf if you're not able to from a financial perspective, and then healthcare proxy, so someone can make decisions for you on behalf of on a healthcare basis if you're not able to. And these are all good things to have, so you can talk with this person that you've appointed or two people, so they know what you would have wanted. The nice to have, but I would almost say I would want you to have it, is a couple of things. A trust. The reason why a trust is important if you don't have it already is that it actually keeps your money and your affairs private. It avoids probate. And it means that if you pass away and everybody knows what you intended and everything gets set up. A trustee sets it up for you and your money will go exactly where it needs to go. And it doesn't have to go through the whole probate process, which is honestly very onerous. And I'm thinking, someone's mourning the loss of you, and it helps a lot if you have this kind of already in place. And in your will, actually, you can set up a trust through that as well. A letter of intent. This is just a letter that you might just write. And, it's kind of one of those, I think of the Terminator when they're like, if you're watching this movie, that means something bad happened. Well, I don't mean to be that dark about it, but it is good to have a letter that just kind of more completely outlines your intentions and what you want for your family. And lastly, annual exemptions. This is just something to know and something a lot of my wealthy clients previously used to do. There is something called a gift tax when you give money to someone, but actually you can give up to $18,000 to anybody per person per year, and it's before the gift tax. So that means if you're married, it's $36,000 from both of you each year. Okay, two more things to consider. Term life insurance. I think of it as like mortgage insurance. How many people here own a home? Okay, now I know mortgage rates are high, not everybody. But if you have a mortgage and you have someone that you live with or take care of, children, things like that, I think it's really important to have something like term life insurance. A lot of other insurance stuff I think can be just sort of, more helpful for the insurance company than you. But term life insurance is helpful because it's the cheapest. And what you can do, and I've done this, is set up term life insurance that kind of covers the lifespan of my kids, for example. So I have the most kind of coverage until they get to the age of 21. And then after that, it kind of goes away. And this means that if something were to happen to me or my partner, we could end up making sure that the home is ours and, the family can live there because, both of us equally contribute to the income. So I think it's really important. Okay, last lesson. You have a will, but you also have things like maybe 401ks or IRAs that we just talked about. And for each of them, there's something called a beneficiary. For those specific types of plans, you outline, okay, I want this money to go to this person. The will does not cover the beneficiaries. So I have a story. I had a client. He was married to a woman, put his wife down as a beneficiary for his 401k and his IRA. Then he got divorced. He got married to a new person. They have a will. He wrote everything going to his new person and his kids in the will. He forgot about his beneficiaries. He passed away and his ex-wife got all of that money in the retirement accounts because the will does not translate to the beneficiaries. So it's just really, really important. to make sure you're checking this stuff and keeping it updated.